you have dedicated your second chapter to apologetics specifically of God using, or at least biblical authors using polemics in the Old Testament as the way they would present certain themes which were well known among the ancient Jewish neighbors. And one of these things were when it comes to the chaos camp, that there was chaos in the Bible. I have the whole episode with one person where we talked about chaos as being God's enemy, or where we talked about Leviathan, or about Baal. How about us starting with Baal? And when it comes to the polemics and apologetics, how come Old Testament authors in the Pentateuch they're using, but also later in the Psalms, how come they're using same terminology for Yahweh as for Baal? For example, the rider on the clouds and stuff like that. Could it be that they stole, so to speak, from pagans, or could it be that there is a common theme that symbolizes and points to Yahweh because it's a powerful tool of polemics, which was a tool that the ancient people used among each other?
Yeah, that's pretty much what I argue in the book, that, and again, this comes from scholars as well, where they note that even in the text itself, when you see, by the time they get out of Deuteronomy and you get into the book of Joshua and they're in Canaan, you see the language about God change from, versus when they're in Egypt and the Exodus and Deuteronomy and such. The language about God changes and becomes more storm god language. And you're right. That's exactly what goes on. Is you'll see the same language that was used of Baal in ancient Canaan is used by Yahweh towards that is used by the Israelite writers of Yahweh. So it says, God rides a storm cloud. I already mentioned God defeats Leviathan, the sea dragon. Well, the Canaanite storm god Baal was supposed to have defeated Leviathan himself and drank up the sea and all that. And so what Israel's doing is, does that mean syncretism? Are you saying that, the Jews just drew from pagan religions and just believe the same things and just changed it a little bit, so it evolves out of other religions? No, not at all. They use similar concepts to describe God. God's a rock and a mountain. I mean, there's all kinds of language that's used to describe God. And one of that is as the storm god who conquers the seas and conquers the dragon. And that, and rides the clouds. So riding the clouds was a metaphor for deity, number one. Baal was a god. And secondly, it was that he was bringing judgment. Riding on the clouds is a metaphor for bringing judgment. And so you see the same terminology. Yahweh rides the clouds. In Isaiah, Yahweh rides the clouds against Egypt to judge Egypt. So what they're doing is they're not syncretistically sort of, accepting Canaanite religion and just evolving into something else. No. They're using similar imagery to say, basically, Baal is not the storm god who brings us rain and conquers the sea dragon. Yahweh is the storm god who created storms, creates rain, and conquers the sea dragon. So again, they're using this common imagery in the new context. They're now in the context. Where did they come from? The desert lands of Egypt. Now they're in the rainy, stormy land of Canaan. So they start to use storm language of God. This isn't syncretistic evolution of religion. It's just common cognitive environment. That's what John Walton, I got that from John Walton. I think he's done a lot of great work on this material in his books like The Lost World of Genesis and such. But it's a common cognitive environment of common symbols and imagery and such. And so, yeah, so there's that, but there's also, they demonize other beings. Like there's something interesting that goes on. Ashtoreth is a goddess in the Bible that is referred to. And it's interesting because Ashtoreth, there is no name of a Canaanite god called Ashtoreth. So what is this? Well, actually, the goddess was called Ashtart. or Astarte. But Ashtart is the Philistine way of describing it, the goddess. And if you look what the Jews did, or the Hebrews who were writing the Bible, what they did was they took the name of Ashtart, and they didn't like saying the name because they don't like goddesses, right? They hate goddesses more than other gods, right? And so they used the vowels of the word for shame, Bosheth. They put the vowels for the word for shame and put them into the consonants for Ashtart, and it comes up with Ashtoreth. And so, in other words, they're mocking and degrading Ashtoreth by calling it a shameful thing, you know. And there's a lot of word plays that go. The name for Jezebel, actually, Jezebel's name, we know what it is because we found, artifacts related to Tyre, and it was actually Isabel, which means where is the prince, and the bull Baal, which is Baal meant prince, and they worshipped Baal in Tyre. So where is the prince Baal? Isabel. Well, Zebel means dung, right? Excrement in Hebrew. So they changed the name from Isabel to Jezebel in the text to basically say like the queen of dung type of thing, right? And this is why at the very end of 2 Kings 9, it says, the corpse of Jezebel shall always be as dung on the face of the field in the territory of Jezreel, so that no one can say this is Jezebel. So even the name Jezebel is really a deliberately twisted name in order to make a mocking judgment on it. So those are just a couple examples of how they interact with the pagan environment, and sometimes they mock it and play with the words, and sometimes they just use the same symbols, but they subvert them. So in my book, I explain what's subversion. So it's different than syncretism. Syncretism is when you try to combine your religion with another religion. That's what Rome did, right? Rome would say, well, you can worship any god you want, just also worship Caesar, you know? And they would kind of consume all the other religions within it, right? So that's syncretism. But that's not what the Jews were doing. What they were doing was subversion, which is a different tact altogether. Subversion is when you use the common imagery and common symbols of a culture, you use them, but you invest them with new meaning and new definitions. Sometimes you explain it, sometimes you don't, because you're subverting, you're undermining the original ideas. That's the way you capture cultures, right? Look, the world does it to us. When you see movies and sometimes books, but certainly a lot of movies that tell the stories of Christian people, they'll often take the Christianity out of the movie and make it look like it's a humanist. Like what was it? Was story Broken? The movie Broken about the Christian Louis Zamperini, right? World War II and all this, and they pulled out the faith, so it's almost not even there. And yet, if you read the original book, it's like everything is about his faith, right? And so they are undermining our Christian stories and turning them into humanist stories. Well, they do the same thing to us, and God does the same thing to them. God takes their concepts and he undermines them with new meaning. And that's what I do as a storyteller as well. So that's why I've written stories where I rather than I believe Christians should be out there retelling the stories of the culture. We should be writing biographies of atheists like Friedrich Nietzsche, and Freud and Darwin, because we need to reinterpret their life stories through our worldview and paradigm, give it new meaning. They're doing that to us all the time, right? Well, everybody does this. Even God does it. So I'm not just saying, oh, we can do this because other people are doing it. If God himself does it with Leviathan, with atonement, with all these things, then why don't we do it too? And I think that's just the nature of storytelling. It subverts. It uses the things that we're familiar with, the symbols and ideas and images, or genres, and repackages them with new meaning. That's why, by the way, that's what they're doing right now with all the woke stuff in Hollywood, right? They're retelling Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs with a woke, she's not going to be kissed by a prince. The prince isn't going to save her. The dwarfs aren't small anymore. They're reinterpreting all these old stories in a new paradigm in order to communicate different values. And that's the danger. And we need to be doing the same thing right back to them. We need to be controlling the mythology as much as we possibly can.